Starting off with our friend Mark Gurman, he has a feeling that the Face ID will eventually come to the Mac, but not on a notebook first. He made a comment in his new newsletter that says the feature will most likely show up in an iMac, and that's because the technology needed to build Face ID into an ultra-thin notebook display just really doesn't exist right now. Now, it did kind of seem, at least to me, like Apple might have been preparing for Face ID in a notebook, especially when they added the notch to the new 14-inch and 16-inch designs. We know the current ones don't have Face ID yet, but seemed like, hey, there's a notch in there. Notch on the iPhone was required to get Face ID technology in there, so maybe that's what Apple was planning for the notebooks. Though in the past, Mark Gurman also did say that Face ID would make its way into an updated iMac, and that was before the release of the 24-inch iMac. So we don't know what happened there. He didn't get the prediction right at that point. This time around, it's been rumored that the 27-inch iMac Pro, that update is looming on the horizon. He didn't specifically call out that model for getting Face ID, but maybe that will be the first Mac to feature Face ID. We'll just have to wait and see on that one. Now, one thing mentioned in the articles about Face ID on the Mac is that while it would be great for unlocking your Mac, using it for Face ID purchases would require some other kind of validation or confirmation of the action that you would need to take to make that purchase. And so if that is true, some people were saying, does it make sense for Face ID to come to the Mac? Because it's really just going to be used for unlocking, and then to use it for actually making purchases, it's still a lot like having to use Touch ID. You're going to have to take some other action to make that purchase. And I was kind of thinking about that, and it's not too different than the way it is on iOS today, especially when you're making an Apple Pay purchase on the web. You still have to confirm that purchase someplace else, like on your Apple Watch or iPhone, or by pressing the Touch ID button. So I guess the point here is that, really, does adding Face ID add much or bring much to the experience to improve the Mac experience? And maybe that's why Apple hasn't brought Face ID over to the Mac yet. And a lot of people really want to see it come. I am a fan of Touch ID, so I think that works great, and I've had no issues with that. Although I have to say, I'm now using my MacBook Pro on my desktop in clamshell mode, and obviously I can't use the Touch ID button when it's like that. So maybe having Face ID on a monitor or an iMac, a display, that would make a lot more sense and maybe make things a little bit easier, and then you could just confirm on your keyboard or your Apple Watch or some other connected device like your iPhone. So who knows? We'll have to see how Apple ultimately brings Face ID to the Mac, if they bring Face ID to the Mac. But I'd be curious to know your thoughts on that. Do you want Face ID on your desktop Mac, or are we fine with it just existing on our iPhones and iOS devices? Let me know how you think it would work, what the advantages you think would be, and give me some feedback. Maccast@gmail.com.